This is Play-by-Playcast,
Is that faster than a Greyhound?
the podcast about play-by-play guys, for play-by-play guys, by, I'm told, a play-by-play guy.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for him.
Now here's the host of Play-by-Playcast, Tom Bodette. Wait, the Motel 6 guy?
We'll leave the light on for you.
No, Joel Godet.
Joe Godet.
Joel with an L.
Okay, here's your host, Joel Godet.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
All right, we've hit 140 episodes old. Welcome back into the pod, everybody. My name is Joel Godet. This is PXPcast, the podcast about play-by-play broadcasters for play-by-play broadcasters, hosted by a play-by-play broadcaster. You can check us out on social media. As always, find us at PXPcast, or you can find myself at Joel Godet, JoelGodett. I forgot the second part of the tag. It's a professional development podcast that dives into the tips, tricks, experience, stories, process, and preparation of some of the biggest and best play-by-play announcers in the business. All right, now you can find us on social media. Or rate and or review the podcast. If you get a couple of seconds, throw a few stars our way on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you have found this here episode. Hope you enjoyed last week's episode with Mike Reese and the episode before that with Donnie Barnes. A couple of really good conversations, as is this conversation. Jason Horowitz is our guest, and it's hard to define who Jason works for and what he does. I'm going to let him do that, because he does a lot of things for a lot of different people. But if you follow sports, you have heard Jason's voice or seen Jason's face. Play-by-play for Big Ten Network and CBS Sports Network, and all over Westwood One's coverage of the NFL and the Olympics, and the list goes on and on and on. Creative guy, though, and interesting to pick his brain from that approach. We'll dive into some pretty interesting takes into how he goes about his business, how he preps, how he tries to do things and take things from a unique and different angle that we will get into. Where we start, though, is his first, quote-unquote, experience as a, quote-unquote, professional broadcaster. Because Jason Horowitz first rose to fame not as a play-by-play announcer or a studio host with a major network, but as a reality show contestant. He is the second person on this podcast that starred on Dream Job on ESPN. He was on season 2 of Dream Job. Anish Shroff of ESPN currently was also a Dream Job contestant. And I say, air quotes experience, air quote, job or industry, because as you'll hear, Dream Job was a reality show, was less a live audition to be a SportsCenter personality and more a reality show that aired on ESPN, which I thought was really cool and interesting and a cool kind of peel back behind the curtain. We'll get into all of that. We'll get into all of the things that Jason does, and we'll get into his creativity, his prep, all that stuff, all our normal topics, but a fun conversation with Jason Horowitz this week of all those places he works here on PXPcast.
Coolest story from Dream Job? The second to last week that I was on the show, we went out, instead of just doing studio stuff, we went out and shot features. Had to come up with our own ideas, had to come up with our own stories. They set up all the shoots and things, but my idea was around the Charlotte Bobcats. They were expansion that year. Coming from Syracuse, obviously Emeka Okafor was such a big deal. UConn had been so good. He was, it was back and forth. Do they take him? Do they take Dwight Howard? The Magic took Dwight Howard, so he goes to Charlotte. So the whole story idea was, can Emeka Okafor become the new face of Charlotte? Now, at that point, by the way, the Panthers were coming off a trip to the Super Bowl. So, Jake Delhomme was certainly a face of Charlotte, and so were some other guys. But that was the idea. And I went down there and did this whole day with Emeka Okafor. I didn't know at the time that One Tree Hill was a big show, but they were starting their first season. One Tree Hill was also on the same day doing a shoot with the Charlotte Bobcats and Emeka Okafor. And had I known that, I probably would have tried to become friends with the folks from One Tree Hill. But spent the afternoon with Emeka Okafor. We went around the Charlotte, did some stuff about the excitement of the Bobcats and the expansion and basketball coming back to Charlotte and all that stuff. And at the end of the day, when I finished with him, he's like, "Hey, what are you doing tonight?" And I said, "Well, nothing." He's like, "Great, let's go out."
Sorry,
so
what?
I got to hang out with Emeka Okafor that night, and we just, we went to a bar. He didn't drink a thing, which probably makes a lot of sense, right? He's the new guy in town, and
he's a highly conditioned athlete.
Extremely. I mean, a very, very good athlete, and he probably, he had just gotten to Charlotte a couple weeks earlier, so he probably didn't know anybody. And at that point, we're the same age. We're both 21 or 22 or whatever he was. And yeah, so we hung out for a couple of hours.
That's wild.
Yeah.
Are you still friends?
No.
Okay.
No. Emeka Okafor's number did not work the same a few weeks later. I can tell you that. The responses a few weeks later did not happen.
You know what? I give you props for trying a few weeks later. So at least there's that. How'd the feature go over?
You know what? I'd have to go back and rewatch it. There were probably some things that were good. There were probably some things that could have been better. But I will say that the video quality was much better than anybody else in college because I didn't shoot it. ESPN's camera folks were in charge of shooting it. So some good footage, some good B-roll. Honestly, I don't even remember who his teammates were. We interviewed some of his teammates. In hindsight, you probably shouldn't ask a professional basketball player, hey, is he going to be the best player on the team? That's probably not the best question to ask somebody who's been in the league a few years. But, yeah, it was a good experience. It was really good.
How did it all come to be, and how did you make it work? Being in college, and you went back and forth, right?
Yeah. So the summer before senior year of college, they were having auditions, and it was kind of the same thing as what you picture American Idol. People were just lined up out the door. The American Idol traveled across the country, and they shoot it and they film it and they document the whole thing, and then they whittle it down to semifinalists, and then they pick the finals. So that summer, I drove with a buddy of mine. It was right before my birthday, so end of July 2004. Because I remember as we were driving back from D.C. after the audition, it turned midnight on my birthday. So I turned 21 on the drive back from the audition for Dream Job. But, it was at the ESPN Zone. There were restaurants back then called the ESPN Zone. I'm sure a lot of people remember them. And so I went to the one in D.C. You waited around the corner just like you picture you would. You waited an hour or so or whatever it was. And then there was just a whole bunch of people. They took 10 people at a time. And they asked people to do their best sports call. And so honestly, I don't even remember what I did, or how I did it, but it was something about, the Pistons game-winning shot to beat the Trailblazers in the 1990 NBA championship because Vinnie Johnson had it, and it's one of my favorite moments as a kid growing up. And so I just did that. I did a play-by-play call of that. And it was in front of 9 other people at a round table, and then whoever the producers were. And then they hey, you come into this back room. And then I went into the back room. And so I had another part of an audition and filled out a couple of pieces of paper out. And a couple of weeks later, I got a call, and they're like, hey, we want you to come to the finals auditions in New York City, and you have to do X, Y, or Z. And the whole idea was to stand out. And in hindsight, my audition in front of Al Jaffe, who was in charge of talent at the time, and I don't remember who else was in the room, but 15 other people. I carried a boombox through the streets of New York City because I used to be a bar and bat mitzvah DJ when I was in high school.
I can see that, actually.
So, yeah, a DJ and a dancer. And so I did that, basically. I did the hustle in front of Al Jaffe and 9 other people in a room. And I don't remember what else I did that I didn't, but they were looking for people with personalities, and they were looking for people with energy. And so it stood out, and somehow that was good enough to make the show.
So it literally had nothing to do with I'm a college student in this area. I just carried a boombox and it worked.
No. And it was only the second time I had ever been to New York City. The first was on a trip in high school with a youth group for a couple of days. And so this time I was staying with a friend of mine who had just moved, like a lot of college kids who moved to New York, they, share a compartment with 1 or 2 other people. And so I stayed on her couch for 2 days. And my first experience with a New York City cab driver is I wasn't sure where I was going. I didn't know at the time that New York City streets are pretty actually easy to navigate. And, they're just numbers. They're not that hard. But I go out of her apartment building, and there's this cab driver on the side of the road. And I said, excuse me, sir, could you point me in? And he looks me in the eyes, looks extremely embarrassed. He looks down. I look down, and I realize he's peeing in a cup. So that was my first New York City taxi experience. Haven't had that one since.
I'm not going to touch that one. We'll leave that there. What did you, for somebody who was a student of it and in college and wanting to get into it, like, what did you, once you got into the process on the show, in the whole thing, like, what did you learn about the industry that you didn't know then and that students now maybe wouldn't expect but should know that you get thrust into when you do that whole thing?
From the show? What did I learn from the show about the industry?
Well, just, I mean, because you're around it, so, or maybe not. I mean, were you kind of...
So that's, the show was, so Stuart Scott, the late Stuart Scott was the host. And so as he's as awesome, I should say he was as awesome as that gets. And people who talk about how giving he was and how, you know, he would listen and he was, you know, for advice and professional and all those, everyone who speaks highly of him is speaking the truth. He was all of that. And that's one of the relationships I wish I would have continued afterwards. We never stayed in touch. But the show itself wasn't so much about the industry as it was them putting on something with entertainment value. They would take us around. So I was still a student at Syracuse. I was the only person on the show. Now, Anish Shroff had just graduated. So I was the only person on the show who was still a college student.
Was Mike Hall on your season, or was he season 2?
Nope, Mike Hall was a different season.
Okay.
He was the first season, and certainly much funnier than I am. So I was the only one who was still in college at the time. And so, let's see, we taped Tuesday night. So Wednesdays, I would fly back to back to Syracuse. I would do WAER stuff, a couple of class things. And then Saturday afternoons, I would fly back to New York, and I would be there Saturday. So they put stuff together. They were taking you around the city, and you know they were shooting you about how your experience has been. What do you feel about? Hey, this person said this about you. What do you think? And like they were building a drama, right? They were building what you think about Big Brother or Survivor or The Bachelor, where they take you off into a corner and they're like, hey, talk badly about this person. So like all of that stuff happened. So Dream Job was as much about a show as it was about the industry. And then the actual show had parts about the industry, right? So like I had never had to do something where your teleprompter breaks. Now, they didn't tell us your teleprompter was going to break, but as you know, and other people know who are in the business or anything else, like things like that happen. And of course you don't know what's going to happen. They had stuff set up where they intentionally were going to mess you up. And in a actual business situation, you might know stuff's going to happen, but yeah, you have to be able to do stuff on the fly. So I learned more about being able to handle, or in the case of how I didn't handle it, but be able to handle adversity and things on the fly there than I ever did before that. And I got a piece of advice a couple of years out of college from someone who I started working with a lot when I graduated, when we were doing CBS stuff, CBSSports.com stuff. Tim Brando once told me very early in my career, they pay you for what you might have to do. They don't pay you for what you do. And on the surface, that seems silly. You get paid for what you're doing. But the reality is, in almost every situation, something's going to change, and you have to be able to handle it and make it sound smooth so nobody knows things are going wrong. And that happens every single day in whether it's Westwood One or calling a game, or you have a change of direction. Breaking news happens, all of that, and you have to be able to handle it. And so I learned that, and that is the best phrase that I've ever heard in terms of what you have to be able to do as a broadcaster.
Sometimes you have to record inside the NFL or NFL Today in a outdoor radio booth in Ypsilanti on someone else's equipment. It just, you never know.
You know what? Exactly. And I hope they paid you for it. I know they didn't pay me for it. No, but I mean, that's the perfect point, right? Like something broke, news broke. I was calling a game. You were there. It was Eastern Michigan, Ball State, and just had to be ready to record something. Now that's a little bit more time, and it's not, not on the fly.
Sure.
But doing the NCAA tournament, there's nothing that's dictated, and it's all being able to handle stuff on the fly, and that is as important as anything else in this business. I mean, in terms of the actual aspects of broadcasting. Now, like any business, there's a lot of other aspects that are more important than that. But in terms of the actual broadcasting, being able to handle change is so important.
So here's the biggest question. What do you do? Like, what are all your jobs?
Too many, but that's a wonderful thing, right?
Yeah.
I am the studio host for Westwood One. Westwood One's college coverage of football and basketball. The network radio host of the NCAA tournament, the studio host for the NCAA tournament, the Olympics, some championship sports like lacrosse. I host NFL shows and fill in on their NFL broadcast as well for Scott Graham when he's doing games. I am a play-by-play announcer for, among others, CBS Sports, Big Ten Network, and NBC Sports Network. And I host a daily radio show on Sirius XM ESPN Radio with Andy Staples.
Okay.
Does that sort of summarize it?
No, that's good. What do you like? That's a dangerous question. What do you like most? What allows your creative
Good
juices
partners.
to flow?
Good partners.
Okay.
I mean that in all seriousness. And I don't even mean like good at their jobs. I just mean people I like being around. Because that's another thing people talk about when you first get into the business is it's all about or at least it used to be, but certainly still is to some extent, a relationship business. Like most businesses, it's about people are going to do things for people they like. But I like being around people who are okay understanding that we're doing something fun. We're working in sports. It's not that serious. We're going to do a good job. We're going to be focused, but it's not that serious. And I enjoy that. So that's one of the reasons I like the radio show the most, because Andy Staples is an outstanding partner. When I was working with Danny Cannell, and when Sean Farnham fills in, he's very good. And there's some others as well. Chris Spatola, those guys are great. But Andy and I have a nice connection, and it works really well, and it's fun. And yes, it's a college sports channel and focused around sports, but it's kind of like a what's what and a what's going on, and it just kind of like a life show almost. Being at a game is second to none, right? The energy, even in an arena where maybe the crowd's not huge, still second to none, because you never know what's going to happen. There's always a new story to develop. And then my favorite event is the one I always wanted to work on, and I've been lucky enough to do the last 5 years, is the NCAA tournament. I never thought growing up that I would be part of the official broadcast, the actual broadcast of the NCAA tournament, and I'm lucky enough to be at the hub of it. And then, the studio host for the pre and post and halftime for the Final Four. I mean, it's everything I really wanted it to be growing up as a kid.
What makes a great partner? And I mean that specifically from a play-by-play standpoint. Guys you work with when you're thrust into a situation where maybe you've never met them or you haven't met them a ton, and you have to act like you do for 2 hours. What makes that relationship work best to you?
So back that up and say it's the play-by-play's job to make the partner better, right? You are always trying to set up your partner for them to be in a great position. Having said that, I just like a guy with energy, and someone who can go with the flow. If a joke happens, go with it, That's me. That's my personality. I don't take things too seriously. So that's kind of how I like others to be. But again, it can be the best of both worlds. Like, I've had the chance to work with, younger guys who are just like that, and then older veterans who have been calling games for 30 years, and both of them work. Yeah, like Dan Bonner is a perfect example. Dan's fantastic, right? He's been calling the tournament forever. He played at Virginia in the 70s. He's still calling the tournament for CBS and Turner, and I got a chance to call a regular season game with him a couple years ago at GW, and he's definitely an interesting guy. He's definitely fun and entertaining, but he's very serious in terms of his preparation, and he wants to do a good job. He's been doing it forever. It just so happened that right before the game, about 7 minutes beforehand, I fell out of my chair and fell backwards at George Washington. And it kind of just made things pretty loose the rest of the way, where, we were able to have some jokes back and forth. And it was a good broadcast. We had a top 15 team at the time. Miami was undefeated. It was, one of the last non-conference games before ACC play in December. And this is a couple of years ago, and so we knew we had a big game. There were going to be a good amount of eyes, and we wanted to do a great job, but it was also nice and fun. So, just things happen, and you have to be able to go with it.
How about I was told, and this, this is one of those things that I guess you guys made happen. I was told by Tim Doyle that you guys did a bit with cheerleaders at a game that you called together.
We did. So
what
we
gets
did.
that flowing, and how do you have the idea to say like this would be cool and not totally outlandish?
So Tim is the perfect example of what I'm talking about. He is goofy. He doesn't take himself too seriously, but when it comes to actual analysis, he is spectacular. His view of a game is outstanding. And so, like, a perfect example of what I'm talking about. But we were doing a Morehead State game. Morehead State's taking on Jacksonville State. Jacksonville State's the defending OVC tournament champions. They're coming in. They're first or second in the league, whatever it was. Morehead State's having a bad year. First-year head coach. Team's not very good. Crowd's not going to be very good, whatever. And as I'm reading up about Morehead State that morning, I noticed that their cheerleaders just came off yet another national championship. There's different divisions in cheerleading, and they just won 2 more championships. One team, one just women. And you start reading some more, and they've won like 45 national titles in 25 years. And so I contacted the cheerleading coach. I'm like, hey, can you tell me more about this? And, it's a basketball game. They're going to have cheerleaders. And so I said, hey, guys, to our production crew, I'm like, hey, let's figure out some kind of bit we could do with the cheerleaders. And I didn't know what we were going to do. But at halftime, while the studio had it, we went over there, and we're like, hey, let's do something. And they put me up in the pyramid. So I was the top of the pyramid. And Tim was at the bottom doing the cheering and all that stuff. And I got to tell you, like, that's one of the scariest things I've ever done. I've gone skydiving. I was much more afraid of being at the top of the pyramid than I was going skydiving, jumping out of a plane from 20,000 feet. And the reason was because I knew on a plane somebody else was in charge. I had nothing to do. In a pyramid, it's my responsibility to stay up there. So that was fun. And it's kind of goofy, and I don't know. I don't know that everyone who wants to be taken seriously as a play-by-play guy would do that. But I had a lot of fun with it, and so we did that.
It worked? I mean, and how did it work? Why did it work?
I don't know that it worked. I mean, it's different, right? Like, look, there are 353 Division I basketball games. There are, with ESPN Plus and ESPN3 and Stadium and to go along with, CBS and CBS Sports Network and Fox and FS1 and BN Sports. Like, there are so many different broadcasts every single day of a college basketball game. It's not even about standing out. Honestly, we didn't do it to stand out.
Well, but how are you different, I guess?
Well, but not even that. Like, yes, you do want to bring different stuff every night, but, like, it gets back to what we were talking about before. I just wanted to do something fun. Because early February, middle of the Ohio Valley Conference season with a team that's at the bottom of the league might not be that fun. It's got to be something fun. And so it was.
What's hard to you about play-by-play? Like, when you sit down and do a game on television, what are the things you work on most so that you can have the job you want?
Silence. That has always been my biggest issue, is laying out a little longer, because nobody in this business gets into this business because they don't talk. Right? Like, you get into this business because you like talking, because you are a good conversationalist, because you like the games, all that stuff, and you want to talk about the games. And so it's really hard to not talk when there's moments that you don't need to talk. And that could be 15 seconds, it could be 20 seconds, and at first it might seem like an hour. But that's always something that I'm conscious of, is not talking over the moment, because people talking too much is certainly a killer. But then the other is, again, going back to making sure that there is chemistry with your partner, and how to make that work, and making sure that you're not doing 2 separate broadcasts, but you're literally doing one thing together. And those are the 2 things that I think are the most important.
Does the talk show stuff and the hosting stuff help with that?
Yes, absolutely. And because I've had so many different partners, because SiriusXM, for the longest time, it wasn't about putting shows together, or at least the channel. It was more about, it was more about having names as analysts, and they would rotate. So, I would host maybe 5 shows a week and have 4 different co-hosts in a given week.
That's next
week because Andy's off next week, so I'm doing 4 shows with 3 different co-hosts. So it's the ability to be able to do that's really important. It gets frustrating at times, but the audience doesn't care if you've never worked with someone before. They just know that if it sounds good or doesn't sound good, and they're there. And the other thing is they're there to watch. With the exception of someone like Bill Walton or Dickie V, they're there to watch, or Billis, right, or Raffs. They're there to watch the game. And so you have to add to it. You're not supposed to be in charge of it.
What are the questions you ask? Do you do probably nothing as formal as this, but is there like a pre-brief with a new person you're working with to sit down and say, like, all right, this is what how do you get the feel for that person before you hit go?
I say, hey, how are you?
All right.
Seriously, it's just a conversation. There might be a moment after we get to know each other a little bit, I'm like, hey, is there something you like to do, or is there something that you focus on, just so I know. And that way, if I'm aware of it, I'll kind of be centered towards it and heading in that direction. But I was an RA in college and for sophomore year, and you do all these get-to-know-you activities because one of the responsibilities of an RA is you got a lot of kids who are freshmen in college who have never been away. Now they're meeting new people, particularly at Syracuse, where it's not a lot of people from the same place coming to the same school, so a lot of people don't know anyone. And it's about getting to know people and people open up. And the biggest aspect of that is just kind of talking, and having conversation and going from there. And that's kind of what we do.
How do you, with all of the things that you do and all of the people that you're working with and all the places you have to be, how much time do you get to review anything that you do?
Not as much as I would like. I will try to watch a few minutes of everything as I can. I will try to focus on what I thought was good to see if it actually was. And then if there's a spot after a game where I thought something was like, I go back and figure out why. But not nearly as much. And the other part of that is because in a bubble, we're just play-by-play guys, or we're just sports announcers, but it's not a bubble. I'm also a dad of 2 young kids and have a wife that, frankly, we need to have more date nights than we actually do. And so all of those things come into play to the point where I don't even watch as much sports at home as I would have ever thought. We when we're watching stuff, it's very rarely sports.
A lot of house hunters.
Some house hunters, because we are in the market. Yeah. There's what, movie a time or two, Daniel Tiger's Neighborhood, whatever. But this is so much more important. Like, one of the things that, and this is any relationship, and this is kind of more along the lines of what we talk about in our radio show, but if life isn't good, your job's probably not going to be good. So you have to have the support at home, and you have to do as good of a job at home as you can, and it's hard. I have a friend who wrote a movie about a quarter-life crisis, a guy in his early 30s having a quarter-life crisis. I think technically that would be like a third-life crisis, but you get the point.
Sure, yeah.
And it's about trying to find himself. He's married. He's trying to make his marriage work. He's thinking about switching careers. All the things that go through people's minds when they're in their early 30s, and maybe some things aren't going the way they thought they would. And that's life. And as awesome as our jobs are, life is part of our jobs. And but the nice thing about games and shows is that for those 2 or 3 hours, most of the time, all the other stuff does kind of fade away.
I know I've got to let you go to do a show here, but I want to ask you one more question on that note. And that is, with the amount of stuff that you do and everything we just talked about, I got asked a question how, somebody looked at my chart and was like, how do you have time to do all this? And my first joking response was, well, I'm single. But, how do you successfully prepare efficiently for the amount of things that you're doing while balancing life, wife, kids, all that?
Hotel rooms. I do is when we're on the road, it's a lot of the prep is there because there's a chance to do it. You do the best you can, but it's when I know I'm behind, I'll focus and at night, just stay up when the kids go to bed and do all that stuff. But I look ahead, try to get out as front as much as I can, and do the best job I can.
Are there things you need? Is there if you have the short version of I've only got X amount of time to do this. What do I absolutely have to have beyond like stats, hometown, high school, all that?
I'd say what's happened recently, right? Like if you read 3 or 4 articles about teams' recent games from the local people who cover them every day, you'll pick up a lot of what you need to know. And that's not saying that he averages 13.7 points per game, but you'll pick up, hey, they've been struggling with turnovers, or coach has been taking timeouts early in the second half, or because they write about the trends, right? And they know the team better than anybody who comes in and just does it 2 or 3 times a year. So if you read those and get caught up on that stuff, you'll have a better feel, and then you have a better idea of what you can kind of plug and play from there.
How do people find you on social media, radio, TV? What's the easiest way to track down Jason Horowitz?
Basically, anywhere they go, I will be there. At Horowitz Jason, because if you go to @Jason Horowitz, you're going to get the Washington Post columnist who covers the Pope and the Vatican. We are not the same person.
No.
Yeah, no, it's great, but we're not the same person, and he's probably much better at his job than I am. Then at any college Westwood One game that you're going to hear, I'm probably somewhere in a studio, not always in New York.
There you go. Horowitz, thank you, man.
Appreciate it, bud.
All right, that's Jason Horowitz joining us here on PXPcast. You can find him on social media @HorowitzJason, and give him a shout out. Let him know you caught the episode and you enjoyed the episode, or you learned something from the episode. Always appreciate when you guys take the chance to let our guests know that their time, their comments, and their insight landed and made an impact. I love the cheerleader thing. Like, that to me is cool. And like, I stumbled upon it. I did a game with Tim Doyle a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about, like, there was a comfy chair set up on the baseline, and he looked at me and he goes, I want to do a segment sitting in the comfy chair. And I was like, hey, I'm in. Like, I'm cool. I'm good with that. And he said, yeah, like last year I did a thing with the cheerleaders with Horowitz. So obviously I had to ask Jason about that. Like, I love different and creative ways to tell stories, broadcast games, point out interesting facts, anecdotes. I didn't see that cheerleader segment, but I'm sure it was really cool, and I'm sure it was probably effective. Like, find different ways to tell stories other than just the ball is in play and let's talk while you watch a game on your screen. I think that's always a lot of fun. Many thanks to Jason for doing this, literally leading directly up to his talk show that he talked about hosting. Literally. We finished taping this episode, and his show started, I believe, 3 minutes later. So, many thanks to Jason for being our guest on episode 140. I did say, if you follow us on social media, I did say Ted Leitner is coming up on the podcast, and that is true. Ted Leitner is coming up on the podcast. I anticipated him being next week's guest, and I'm hoping that can still be the case. But we were supposed to tape this week, and then Manny Machado unofficially signed with the Padres, and I now can't talk to Ted until that actually goes through. So, come on, Manny. Sign on the dotted line. We'll see who next week's guest is. This is PXPcast. I'm Joel Gadet, and we're out.
And that will do it from St. Louis, where the score is inconclusive.